The scorching Wyoming sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, a frontier town that had seen better days but refused to surrender to the harsh realities of 1878. Ethan Cole pulled his weathered Stetson lower over his eyes as he guided his stallion. Midnight, past the weathered storefronts and suspicious glances of townsfolk who knew better than to cross paths with the richest and loneliest man in the territory. At 38, Ethan cut an imposing figure against the backdrop of endless prairie. His broad shoulders carried the weight of tragedy as surely as they bore the responsibility of 4,000 acres of prime grazing land. The Cole Ranch sprawled across the horizon like a kingdom built on sweat, blood, and promises to the dead. His calloused hands gripped the reins with the same fierce determination that had transformed him from a grieving orphan into the most successful cattle baron west of the Mississippi. The memories haunted him still, his parents and younger sister, taken by cholera when he was barely 20. Then Margaret, sweet Margaret with her honeyed words and false promises. Who'd run off with that snake of a banker, taking not just his heart but half his savings? That was 8 years ago. And Ethan had sworn on his family's graves that love was a luxury he'd never afford again. "Afternoon, Mr. Cole," called out Samuel Henderson from the general store, tipping his hat nervously. Ethan acknowledged him with a curt nod, his steel-gray eyes betraying nothing of the storm that perpetually brewed within. The town knew his routine monthly supplies, minimal conversation, and back to the ranch before sunset. He'd built walls higher than any fence on his property, and the good people of Cedar Ridge had learned to respect them or fear them, depending on who you asked. As midnight's hooves kicked up small clouds of red dust, a commotion erupted from the edge of town. Gunshots cracked through the air like thunder, followed by the terrified whinnying of horses and a woman's scream that pierced straight through Ethan's armor of indifference. Without thinking, he spurred midnight toward the chaos. Years of living on the frontier had honed his instincts sharper than any blade. As he crested the small rise outside town, the scene before him made his blood run cold. A stagecoach tilted precariously on 2 wheels. Its driver slumped over the box seat, while 3 masked bandits circled like vultures. "Take everything," one of the outlaws shouted, waving his pistol at the passengers who'd been forced out at gunpoint. Among them, a young woman in a modest blue dress stood protectively in front of an elderly couple, her chin raised in defiance despite the tremor in her hands. Something about her, perhaps the way the late afternoon sun caught the auburn in her hair, or the fierce determination in her posture, made Ethan draw his Winchester from its saddle scabbard without hesitation. 3 against 1, he muttered to midnight. "I've had worse odds." His first shot knocked the gun from the lead bandit's hand. The second sent another's hat flying, along with a good portion of his courage. By the time Ethan thundered into their midst, the outlaws were already scrambling for their horses, deciding that whatever treasures the stagecoach held weren't worth facing the infamous Ethan Cole. "Next time I won't miss on purpose," Ethan called after their retreating forms, his voice carrying the kind of authority that came from years of backing up his words with action. As the dust settled, he dismounted and surveyed the damage. The driver was wounded but breathing, clutching his shoulder where a bullet had grazed him. The elderly couple huddled together, shaken but unharmed. And then there was her. Up close, she was younger than he'd first thought, perhaps 23 or 24, with eyes the color of spring sage and a face that belonged in a church painting, not on a dusty frontier road. Despite the ordeal, she stood straight-backed, already moving to help the wounded driver. "Are you hurt, miss?" Ethan found himself asking, his usually gruff voice softening involuntarily. She turned those remarkable eyes on him, and for a moment, he forgot about his walls, his vows, and everything else that had defined him for nearly a decade. "By God's grace, I'm unharmed," she replied, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed out of place in this rough land. "Though I fear Mr. Jameson here needs immediate attention." Together, they worked to lower the driver from his perch. Her hands, Ethan noticed, were steady and capable despite their delicate appearance. She tore strips from her petticoat without hesitation, fashioning bandages with the efficiency of someone who'd dealt with emergencies before. "You've done this before," he observed. A sad smile crossed her features. "My father tends to the spiritual needs of Cedar Ridge, but bodies need tending too. I've learned to help where I can." The preacher's daughter? Of course. Ethan had heard Reverend Reed had a daughter who had returned from finishing school back east, but he'd paid little attention to town gossip. Now, watching her gentle ministrations to the wounded man, he wondered how he'd missed news of someone who seemed to bring light to this harsh landscape. "I'm Abigail Reed," she said, extending a blood-stained hand without any of the squeamishness he'd expect from a properly raised young lady. "Ethan Cole," he replied, engulfing her small hand in his much larger one. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through him, like touching a live wire during a thunderstorm. "The cattle baron," she said, not as an accusation, but as simple recognition. "Father has mentioned you in his prayers." Ethan almost smiled at that. "I imagine not favorably." "You'd be surprised. He prays for all souls in Cedar Ridge, especially those who seem to carry the heaviest burdens." Before he could respond to that uncomfortably perceptive observation, the elderly gentleman cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, we owe you our lives. Those ruffians would have... Well, I don't like to think what might have happened." "Just glad I was passing by," Ethan said curtly, already rebuilding his walls. This was dangerous territory. Gratitude, connection, those sage green eyes that seemed to see right through him. Working together, they managed to right the stagecoach and get the wounded driver inside. Ethan tied Midnight to the back and took the reins himself, guiding the team toward town with uncharacteristic care. All the while, he was acutely aware of Abigail Reed sitting just behind him, tending to the driver and murmuring words of comfort to the elderly couple. The sun was setting by the time they reached Cedar Ridge, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded Ethan of wildfire. Half the town seemed to pour out onto the street at their arrival, including Reverend Thomas Reed, whose worried face transformed into relief at the sight of his daughter. "Abigail, thank the Lord," the Reverend exclaimed, helping her down from the coach. He was a thin man with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair, the weight of his calling evident in every line of his face. "Father, I'm fine, but Mr. Jameson needs Dr. Morrison immediately, and we must thank Mr. Cole. He drove off the bandits and quite possibly saved all our lives." Reverend Reed turned to Ethan with genuine gratitude. "Mr. Cole, you have my deepest thanks. I know we've had little occasion to speak, but—" "No thanks needed, Reverend," Ethan interrupted, uncomfortable with the growing crowd and their curious stares. "Just did what any man would do." "No," Abigail said quietly, those sage eyes finding his again. "You did what a good man would do. There's a difference." Ethan felt heat rise to his face. When was the last time he'd actually blushed without another word? He tipped his hat and strode to where Midnight waited, needing to escape before those knowing eyes undid 8 years of carefully constructed defenses. But as he swung into the saddle, Abigail appeared at his side, pressing something into his hand. It was a small, embroidered handkerchief, spotted with blood from tending the wounded. "I know it's not much," she said, "but please accept this small token. You've earned more than just our thanks today. Mr. Cole." Their fingers brushed as he took the delicate fabric, and again that lightning strike of connection shot through him. "Miss Reed, I hope this won't be the last time we speak," she said simply, then turned and walked back to her father, leaving Ethan holding a piece of linen that suddenly seemed to weigh as much as all his cattle combined. As he rode out of town, the handkerchief tucked safely in his vest pocket, Ethan Cole tried to convince himself that nothing had changed. He was still the same man who'd sworn off love, who'd built his empire on isolation and self-reliance. but the memory of sage green eyes and steady hands wouldn't leave him be. Back at the Cole Ranch, his foreman, Jake Patterson, noticed the difference immediately. "Eventful trip to town, boss. Stagecoach got hit by bandits. I helped out," Ethan said tersely, unsaddling Midnight with more care than usual. Jake, who'd known Ethan since before Margaret's betrayal, raised an eyebrow at the understatement. "That all?" Ethan paused, his hand unconsciously moving to the pocket where the handkerchief rested. "That's all that matters." But as he lay in his too-large bed that night, staring at the ceiling of the house he'd built for a family that never came, Ethan knew he was lying to himself. Something had shifted in the foundation of his carefully ordered world. The preacher's daughter, with her sage eyes and fearless heart, had cracked the walls he'd spent 8 years building. The richest cowboy swore off love. He murmured to the darkness, remembering the vow he'd made at Margaret's betrayal. But for the first time in years, the words rang hollow, like an echo in an empty canyon. Outside, the Wyoming wind howled across the prairie, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Ethan closed his eyes, but all he could see was auburn hair catching the sunlight and a pair of hands that healed instead of hurt. He'd saved her from bandits, but as sleep finally claimed him, Ethan Cole had the unsettling feeling that Abigail Reed might be the one to save him from himself. 3 days had passed since the stagecoach incident, and Ethan Cole found himself staring at the small handkerchief for the 10th time that morning. The delicate embroidery, tiny forget-me-nots along the edge seemed to mock his attempts to forget the woman who'd given it to him. With an irritated grunt, he shoved it back into his vest pocket and strode out to oversee the morning's work. The Cole Ranch bustled with activity as cowboys prepared for the day's tasks. The sound of horses neighing, spurs jingling, and men calling to each other filled the air. This was Ethan's kingdom, built from nothing but determination and sweat. Yet today, it all felt strangely hollow. "Boss, rider coming," Jake Patterson called from his position near the main gate. Ethan shaded his eyes against the morning sun, expecting to see one of his cattle buyers or perhaps a messenger from town. What he didn't expect was the sight of Abigail Reed, sitting primly on a borrowed mare, her blue dress replaced by a practical riding skirt and simple blouse. A worn carpet bag was tied behind her saddle. "Miss Reed," he said, unable to keep the surprise from his voice as she reined in before him. "This is unexpected." She dismounted with surprising grace, considering the mare's height. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. I hope I'm not intruding." "Course not," he lied, already feeling his carefully constructed walls beginning to wobble. "Though I'm curious what brings the preacher's daughter all the way out here." Abigail's sage eyes met his directly, that same fearless quality he'd noticed during the robbery shining through. "I've come to repay my debt." "There's no debt. Miss Reed, I told you." "You saved my life," she interrupted gently but firmly. "Where I come from, that creates an obligation. Since you won't accept thanks or payment, I've come to offer my services." Ethan stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "Your services?" A faint blush colored her cheeks, but she didn't waver. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, tend wounds, and I'm told I have a fair hand at accounts. Surely a ranch this size could use an extra pair of hands, at least temporarily." "Miss Reed, this is a cattle ranch, not a—" He gestured helplessly, trying to find words that wouldn't offend. "It's no place for a lady." "I'm not a porcelain doll. Mr. Cole," she said with a hint of steel in her voice. "I've spent the last 3 years in Boston, yes, but before that, I grew up on the frontier. I know what hard work looks like." Jake, who'd been listening with poorly concealed amusement, chose that moment to interject. "We did just lose our cook, boss. Charlie up and quit last week. Said he was heading to California. The boys have been complaining about my biscuits ever since." Ethan shot his foreman a look that promised retribution, but the damage was done. Abigail's face lit up with triumph. "Providence," she declared, You need a cook, and I need to repay my debt. It's perfect. It's impossible. Ethan countered, Your father would never. My father understands the importance of honoring one's obligations. Abigail said, He also believes that God's work can be done anywhere, not just within church walls. I have his blessing, provided I return to town each Saturday evening and Sunday. Ethan found himself backed into a corner, something that rarely happened in business negotiations and never in personal matters. Miss Reed, you don't understand. This ranch, the men here, they're rough. They're not used to having a woman around who isn't afraid of honest work. She tilted her head, studying him. Or are you worried about something else entirely? Mr. Cole. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither was ready to address. Around them, the ranch hands had stopped pretending to work, openly gawking at the scene unfolding before them. 1 week, Ethan heard himself say, the words coming out before he could stop them. You can stay 1 week, and then we're even, but there are rules. Of course. Abigail agreed readily. You sleep in the main house, in the guest room. It's got a lock. You use it. You don't go near the bunkhouse after dark. And you don't ride out alone. Ever. The men here are good sorts, mostly. But there's still men who haven't seen a respectable woman in months. Understood. And if there's any trouble, any at all, you leave immediately. Agreed. She paused, then added with a slight smile. Do you have any rules about improving the quality of meals around here? Because from what I've heard, your men are suffering terribly. Despite himself, Ethan felt his lips twitch toward a smile. Jake's biscuits are pretty bad. Hey, Jake protested, but he was grinning. Welcome to the Cole Ranch. Miss Reed, I'll help you get settled. As Jake led Abigail toward the main house, Ethan watched her go with a sinking feeling in his stomach. What had he just agreed to 8 years of keeping everyone at arm's length? And now he'd invited trouble right through his front door. The next few hours passed in a blur of normalcy that felt anything but normal. Ethan threw himself into work, checking fence lines and reviewing the accounts, but his concentration was shot. Every time he passed the house, he caught glimpses of activity windows being thrown open, the sound of vigorous sweeping, and was that singing? By noon, an aroma drifted from the kitchen that had Cowboy stopping in their tracks. When the dinner bell rang, there was an actual stampede toward the main house's back entrance where the hands usually took their meals. Ethan entered last, prepared to maintain his usual aloof distance. What he found was organized chaos. Abigail had somehow transformed the dim, utilitarian space into something almost welcoming. Clean cloths covered the long tables. Wildflowers sat in mason jars as centerpieces, and the men were already digging into plates piled high with beef stew, fresh bread, and vegetables that actually looked appetizing. Miss Abigail, one of the younger hands, Tommy Morrison, was saying with his mouth full, This is the best meal I've had since I left home. Don't talk with your mouth full, Mr. Morrison, Abigail chided gently, but she was smiling as she moved between the tables, coffee pot in hand. And it's just simple fare. Wait until I have a chance to do some real baking. The men groaned in anticipation, and Ethan felt something shift in the atmosphere of the ranch. It was subtle, like the change in air pressure before a storm, but undeniable. These hardened cowboys were sitting straighter, minding their language. And was Big Jim actually using a napkin? Mr. Cole, Abigail said, noticing him in the doorway. I saved you a plate in the kitchen. I thought you might prefer to eat in private. He should have been grateful for her understanding of his habits. Instead, he felt oddly disappointed. Thank you, Miss Reed. The kitchen was spotless, a far cry from the disaster Charlie had left behind. His plate waited on the small table by the window, still warm. Ethan ate in silence, but found himself straining to hear the conversation and laughter from the other room. When was the last time he'd heard his men sound so content? A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Abigail entered, carrying a coffee pot and a slice of what looked like apple pie. "I hope you don't mind," she said, setting the pie before him. "I found some preserved apples in the pantry and thought—" "It's fine," he said, then took a bite and had to close his eyes. The pie was perfect tart apples, flaky crust, just enough cinnamon and sugar. It tasted like home, like family, like everything he'd shut out of his life. "My mother's recipe," Abigail said quietly, refilling his coffee cup. "She passed when I was 12, but her recipes lived on." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, meaning it. "Cholera." She shook her head. "Childbirth. My little brother lived 3 days." She said it matter-of-factly, but he could see the old pain in her eyes. "It's why I learned to help with medical matters. I never wanted to feel that helpless again." They shared a moment of understanding. Two people who knew the weight of loss. Then Abigail straightened. All business again. "I've made a list of supplies we'll need from town. Your pantry is woefully understocked. And Mr. Cole, when was the last time those men had fresh vegetables?" "We're a cattle ranch, Miss Reed. We eat beef." "Not anymore," she said with a determined look that he was beginning to recognize. "A proper diet needs balance. I noticed a patch of ground near the house that would make a fine kitchen garden." "A garden," he said it flatly, trying to imagine explaining to his cowboys that they'd be tending vegetables. "Just a small one," she assured him. "I'll manage it myself, mostly, though I might need help with the heavier work." Ethan knew he should say no. Gardens meant permanence, meant roots in more ways than one. But looking at her earnest face, remembering the joy in his men's voices, he found himself nodding. "Jake can assign someone to help you," he said gruffly. "But don't expect miracles. This soil's tough as iron." "So was the soil where I grew up," she said with a smile that did strange things to his insides. "We made it bloom anyway." The rest of the day passed with surreal normalcy. Ethan went about his duties, but everywhere he turned, there were signs of Abigail's presence. Cleaner windows, organized tack rooms, and men who actually washed up before supper without being told. That evening, he found himself on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The sound of Abigail's voice drifted from inside. She was reading to some of the younger hands from what sounded like Pilgrim's Progress. It was such a domestic scene it made his chest ache. "She's something else, ain't she?" Jake said, joining him on the porch. "She's trouble," Ethan replied automatically. "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But maybe trouble's what this place needed. When's the last time you saw the boys this happy? When's the last time you ate a meal that didn't taste like leather?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't, because Jake was right, and that terrified him more than any bandit or business rival ever could. "Just be careful, boss," Jake said quietly. "You can't live behind walls forever. Sometimes the best things in life come from letting someone in." As Jake headed to the bunkhouse, Ethan remained on the porch, wrestling with feelings he'd thought long buried. Inside, Abigail's clear voice read about pilgrims and progress, about journeys and redemption. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd sworn off love, built an empire on solitude, convinced himself that needing no one was strength. Yet here was this slip of a woman, armed with nothing but apple pie and determination, quietly dismantling his defenses one meal at a time. When she finally emerged onto the porch, the last light was fading from the sky. "It's beautiful out here," she said softly, moving to stand beside him. "So different from Boston." "Most find it too harsh," he said, "too empty." "Not empty," she corrected. "Honest. There's no pretense in this landscape. It is what it is, and asks you to be the same." He turned to study her profile in the gathering darkness. Is that why you really came here? Miss Reed for honesty. She was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps. Or perhaps I came because when I saw you that day, risking your life for strangers, I saw someone who'd forgotten his own goodness. That seemed like something worth reminding him of. Before he could respond, she bid him good night and disappeared inside, leaving him alone with the stars and the uncomfortable truth that Abigail Reed saw him more clearly than he saw himself. That night, as he lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch, Ethan realized that his orderly world had already changed. The question was whether he had the courage to let it. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Josiah Blackstone's carriage rolled up to the Cole Ranch's main gate. Ethan, already out checking the water troughs, felt his jaw tighten at the sight of the ornate black vehicle with its matched pair of grays. Nothing good ever came from a Blackstone visit. Mr. Cole, Josiah called out as he descended from the carriage, his expensive suit looking absurdly out of place against the dusty ranch backdrop. He was a lean man in his 40s, with cold blue eyes and a smile that never quite reached them. I hope I'm not interrupting your morning labors. Blackstone, Ethan acknowledged curtly. What brings you out here? Can't a neighbor pay a friendly visit? Josiah's smile widened, showing too many teeth. I heard you've been making some interesting changes around here. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Word traveled fast in Cedar Ridge, but Abigail had only been at the ranch for a week. I don't see how my affairs concern you. Oh, but they do, Josiah said, pulling out a cigar and taking his time lighting it. You see, when the territory's largest ranch owner starts housing the preacher's daughter, people talk, and when people talk, business can be affected. You get to the point, Blackstone. The point, my friend, is that I'm concerned about you. First, you're neglecting profitable opportunities like that deal I proposed last month, and now you're risking your reputation with this arrangement. Miss Reed is employed as a cook, nothing more. Of course. Josiah's tone suggested he believed nothing of the sort. Still, I'd hate to see you distracted when there are important matters at hand. The drought's getting worse. Ethan, your cattle need water, and I happen to control the best water rights in the valley. There it was, the real reason for the visit. The spring rains had been sparse, and the summer was shaping up to be one of the driest on record. The streams that fed Ethan's land were already running low. I'm not selling. Blackstone? Did I mention selling? I'm talking about a partnership. Your cattle, my water. We could control the beef market from here to Cheyenne. The answer's no. Josiah's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. You might want to reconsider. Drought has a way of changing a man's priorities. Cattle can't drink pride, after all. The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted their tense exchange. Abigail appeared, riding the gentle mare she'd been using, her face flushed from the morning air. She'd taken to riding out early to gather wild herbs for cooking. Always accompanied by one of the hands, today it was young Tommy Morrison. Mr. Cole, she called out cheerfully, then noticed Josiah. Her expression cooled noticeably. Mr. Blackstone. Miss Reed. Josiah swept off his hat with exaggerated courtesy. What a delightful surprise. Though I must say, I'm shocked to find you in such rustic circumstances. I find honest work far more appealing than idle luxury, Abigail replied evenly, dismounting with Tommy's assistance. How admirably progressive, Josiah murmured, his eyes lingering on her in a way that made Ethan's fists clench. Though I wonder what your dear father thinks of his daughter consorting with rough cowboys. He thinks, Abigail said with quiet dignity, that serving others is the highest calling, regardless of their station. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have breakfast to prepare. She walked past Josiah without another glance, but Ethan caught the slight tremble in her hands. Tommy led the horses away, shooting dark looks at the banker. Spirited little thing, Josiah observed. Margaret was spirited too, as I recall. The mention of his former love was like a knife between the ribs, and Josiah knew it. Ethan took a step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous level. "Get off my land, Blackstone, now!" "Think about my offer, Ethan," Josiah said, returning to his carriage unhurriedly. "And do be careful. It would be a shame if the preacher's daughter got caught up in matters beyond her understanding. Good day." As the carriage rolled away, Ethan stood frozen, rage and worry battling in his chest. Josiah's veiled threat was clear. Abigail was now a potential target in their ongoing feud. He found her in the kitchen, kneading bread with perhaps more force than necessary. "I apologize for Blackstone," he said. "He had no right to speak to you that way." "I've encountered worse," she replied, not looking up. "Though I admit I didn't expect to find such venom this far from Boston's drawing rooms. Josiah Blackstone's got venom enough for any territory. You should know. There's history there." Abigail paused in her kneading. "Margaret?" Ethan stiffened. "Jake's got a loose tongue." "Jake cares about you," she corrected gently. "He told me only what he thought I should know for my own safety. That Mr. Blackstone pursued your former fiancée and ultimately won her hand through questionable means. He won her with promises of wealth and status." Ethan said bitterly. "Things I was too busy building this ranch to provide fast enough." "Then she was a fool," Abigail said simply, returning to her bread. "Any woman who would choose guilt over gold deserves what she gets." Her matter-of-fact defense of him was unexpected, and Ethan found himself without words. He watched her work, noting the determined set of her jaw, the way her hair escaped from its pins to curl at her neck. "There's something else," he said finally. "The drought's worse than we thought. I need to take the herd to water, maybe as far as Devil's Canyon. It'll mean being gone for several days." "I see." She shaped the dough into loaves with practiced movements. "When do you leave?" "Tomorrow. If Jake can get the men ready, you should go back to town while we're gone." She turned to face him then, flour dusting her cheek. "Why?" "Because Blackstone's right about one thing people are talking. Your reputation. My reputation is my concern. Mr. Cole, I committed to a full week of work, and I intend to honor that commitment. Besides, someone needs to keep the home fires burning while you're away." "It's not safe. You being here alone?" "I won't be alone. Some of the men are staying behind. Aren't they?" "To watch the property." "Yes, but—" Then it settled. She turned back to her bread, the discussion clearly over in her mind. Ethan wanted to argue further, but the set of her shoulders told him it would be pointless. This slip of a woman had a spine of iron beneath her gentle exterior. The next day dawned hot and dry, the air already shimmering with heat mirages. Ethan supervised the gathering of the herd, nearly 800 head of prime beef cattle, representing the bulk of his fortune. The cowboys worked with grim efficiency, knowing that the next few days would test both man and beast. "You sure about this, boss?" Jake asked, watching the dust cloud rise from the milling cattle. "Devil's Canyon's rough country." "It's that or watch them die of thirst," Ethan replied. "The canyon's got the only reliable water left." As they prepared to move out, Abigail appeared with a pack of provisions, dried meat, hardtack, and something wrapped in cloth that smelled suspiciously like fresh cookies. "For the journey," she said, handing the pack to Jake. Then, more quietly to Ethan, "Be careful. I have a feeling, mister. Blackstone isn't done making trouble." "Keep your doors locked," he told her, "and if there's any sign of trouble, you ride for town immediately. Promise me." "I promise to be sensible," she said, which wasn't quite the same thing. Then, surprising them both, she reached up and briefly touched his cheek. "God go with you, Ethan." He caught her hand, holding it for a moment longer than propriety allowed. "Abigail." "The men are waiting," she said softly, stepping back. Bring them home safely. The drive to Devil's Canyon was every bit as arduous as Ethan had feared. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the cattle grew increasingly restless as their thirst deepened. By the second day, they were pushing through country that seemed more moonscape than earth-red rocks, sparse vegetation, and dust that coated everything. There, Jake pointed ahead to where the canyon walls rose like ancient sentinels. Water should be just beyond that bend. They pushed the herd forward, hope rising with each step. But as they rounded the corner, Ethan's heart sank. The usually reliable stream was down to a trickle, barely enough to muddy the ground. "Boss," one of the cowboys called out. "We got company." A group of riders was approaching from the opposite direction, driving their own herd. As they drew closer, Ethan recognized the Bar B brand Blackstone's outfit. "Funny meeting you here. Cole," Blackstone's foreman, a hard case named Ritter, called out. "Seems we had the same idea." "There's not enough water for both herds," Jake said quietly to Ethan. "I know," Ethan replied, his mind racing. The unwritten law of the range said first come, first served, but they'd arrived simultaneously. This could get ugly fast. "Tell you what, Cole," Ritter said, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Mister, Blackstone anticipated this might happen. He's willing to let your cattle drink for a price. Say 30% of your herd." "Highway robbery," Jake spat. "It's business," Ritter countered. "Take it or leave it, though I'd decide quick your cattle look mighty thirsty." Ethan studied the situation. They were outnumbered. His cattle were suffering, and every minute of delay made things worse, but 30% would ruin him. "Counteroffer," he said, 15%, and we share the water equally. Ritter laughed. "You're in no position to negotiate, Cole." As if to emphasize the point, several of Blackstone's men spread out, hands near their weapons, the tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, from behind a cluster of rocks, came an unexpected sound singing. A moment later, a grizzled old prospector appeared, leading a pack mule and belting out a hymn in a voice that could charitably be called enthusiastic. "Well, well," the old man said, seeming unsurprised by the standoff. "Quite a gathering. You boys here for the water?" "Move along, old-timer," Ritter warned. "This doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it might," the prospector said cheerfully. "Seeing as how I know where there's water aplenty, not 2 miles from here. Found it yesterday while looking for silver. Spring-fed pool, clear as crystal." Ethan exchanged glances with Jake. It could be a lie, but the old man seemed genuinely unconcerned about the tension. "You'd share this information?" Ethan asked carefully. "Share and share alike. That's what the good book says." The prospector replied, "Course, I might be more inclined to show one group over another, depending on who's more charitable." Understanding dawned. "What's your name, friend?" "Ezekiel Hornsby, at your service." Ethan made a decision. "Mr. Hornsby, I'd be pleased to offer you employment as a guide. $20 now. 20 when we reach water. Now that's Christian charity." Ezekiel beamed. "Follow me, gentlemen." Ritter's face darkened. "This isn't over, Cole." "It is for today," Ethan replied, already signaling his men to move the herd. The prospector led them through a narrow defile that opened into a hidden valley. There, as promised, was a pool of clear water fed by an underground spring. The cattle surged forward, drinking deeply, while the men filled their canteens and watered the horses. "How did you know we could trust him?" Jake asked later, as they made camp for the night. "I didn't," Ethan admitted, "but sometimes you have to have faith." As he spoke the words, he thought of Abigail, probably reading her Bible by lamplight back at the ranch. Faith. When had he started believing in it again? The storm hit that night without warning. The sky which had been clear at sunset, suddenly erupted with lightning and thunder. But instead of rain, it brought only wind fierce, scouring wind that drove sand and debris like bullets. "Sandstorm," Jake shouted. "Get the cattle into the lee of those rocks." They worked frantically to move the herd to shelter, but the wind was disorienting, turning the world into a brown hell of stinging particles. Ethan lost sight of his men, could barely see the horse beneath him. Then, through the chaos, he heard Ezekiel's voice, singing that same hymn, clear and strong despite the storm, following the sound like a beacon. Ethan found the old man sheltered behind a large boulder, still singing as if he were in Sunday services. "This way," Ezekiel called out between verses. "There's a cave." One by one, the cowboys found their way to the shelter, driving as many cattle as possible into the natural corral formed by the rocks. They huddled together, men and beasts, while the storm raged outside. "Quite a blow," Ezekiel observed conversationally. "Reminds me of a storm I saw once in the Sinai. You ever read about Moses and the Israelites? Mr. Cole?" "Some," Ethan replied, checking on his men. 40 years in the wilderness." The old man continued. 40 years of wandering before they found their promised land. Sometimes I think we're all wandering, looking for home. What do you think you're looking for? It was an odd question to ask during a sandstorm, but something about the old man's calm presence invited honesty. "I thought I was looking for success," Ethan said quietly. "Security, independence. And now?" Ethan thought of sage-green eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Now I'm not so sure." The storm blew itself out near dawn, leaving a transformed landscape. As they emerged from shelter and took stock miraculously, they'd lost no men and only a few cattle. Ethan found himself looking homeward with an urgency that had nothing to do with business. "Jake, can you handle getting the herd back? I need to." "Go," his foreman said with a knowing smile. "We'll be fine. Just remember what the old man said about finding home." As Ethan saddled midnight and prepared for the hard ride back, Ezekiel pressed something into his hand, a small, carved wooden cross. "For the young lady," the old man said with a wink. "Tell her it's from a fellow traveler on the road to redemption." Ethan stared at him. "How did you?" But Ezekiel was already walking away, singing another hymn, as if mysterious prospectors appearing at crucial moments was the most natural thing in the world. The ride back to the ranch was the longest of Ethan's life. With each mile, his concern grew. What if Blackstone had made good on his threats? What if something had happened while he was gone? When the ranch finally came into view in the late afternoon light, everything looked peaceful. Too peaceful. Then he saw her, standing on the porch as if she'd been watching for him, and his heart did something complicated in his chest. "You're back early," Abigail said as he dismounted, trying to sound casual despite the relief clear in her eyes. "The herd's safe. Jake's bringing them home." He climbed the steps slowly, drinking in the sight of her. "Any trouble?" "None to speak of," she said, but something in her tone made him look closer. "Abigail, what happened?" She sighed. "Mr. Blackstone paid a visit. He made some suggestions about my position here. I declined to discuss them." Rage flared in Ethan's chest, but before he could speak, she placed a gentle hand on his arm. "It's handled. Your men, Big Jim especially, made it clear that anyone who bothered me would answer to them. I've never felt safer." The idea of his rough cowboys protecting Abigail in his absence filled him with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He pulled out the wooden cross Ezekiel had given him. "A fellow traveler sent this for you," he said, "called himself Ezekiel. He helped us find water when things looked dire." Abigail took the cross, her eyes widening. "Ezekiel, did he sing hymns?" "Constantly." She laughed, a sound like spring water in the desert. "Then you met an angel unawares. Mama used to say God sends help in the strangest forms." Standing there on the porch, with the setting sun painting the sky and this remarkable woman smiling up at him. Ethan felt something shift inside his chest. The walls he'd built so carefully, maintained so rigidly, were crumbling like sandstone in a storm. "Abigail," he began, not sure what he wanted to say, but knowing he needed to say something. "Supper's getting cold," she interrupted gently, as if sensing he wasn't ready. "And you look like you could use a good meal and about 12 hours of sleep." He let her lead him inside, toward warmth and food, and something that felt dangerously like home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges Blackstone wouldn't give up easily, and the drought was far from over. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, Ethan Cole allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd been wandering in his own wilderness long enough. The Sunday service at Cedar Ridge Community Church was fuller than usual, whispers rippling through the congregation like wind through wheat. Abigail sat in her customary pew near the front, her back straight and eyes focused on her father's sermon, but she could feel the weight of dozens of stares. "Judge not, lest ye be judged." Reverend Reed's voice carried over the murmuring. His text from Matthew seemed particularly pointed this morning. "How easy it is, dear friends, to cast stones when we ourselves dwell in glass houses." Mrs. Henrietta Dobson, the town's most notorious gossip, leaned over to her companion, speaking in a whisper that carried 3 pews back. 3 weeks she's been out at that ranch. It's simply not proper. What kind of example is that for our young ladies? Abigail's hands tightened on her hymnal, but she kept her expression serene. She'd known this was coming. A young unmarried woman working at a bachelor's ranch was bound to set tongues wagging, no matter how innocent the arrangement. After the service, she tried to make her way quickly to the door, but found herself cornered by a group of the town's matrons. "Abigail, dear," Mrs. Dobson began, her smile sharp as a blade. "We're so concerned about you, all alone out there with those rough men." "I'm hardly alone. Mrs. Dobson and Mr. Cole's employees have been nothing but respectful." "Still?" Mrs. Prudence Whitmore chimed in. "Appearances matter. What will people think?" "I hope they'll think I'm a woman who pays her debts and isn't afraid of honest work," Abigail replied evenly. "But your reputation is between me and the Lord, Mrs. Whitmore." Abigail's voice remained gentle but firm. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I promised to visit Mrs. Chen. Her arthritis has been troubling her." She escaped before they could respond, but not before catching sight of her father's troubled expression. He'd defended her choices from the pulpit, but she knew the pressure he was under. The ride back to the Cole Ranch that afternoon felt longer than usual. The sky was cloudless, the heat oppressive, and dust devils danced across the barren landscape. The drought was worsening by the day, turning the once green prairie into a tinderbox. As she approached the ranch, Abigail was surprised to see Ethan himself waiting by the gate. He usually made himself scarce on Sundays, respecting her need to attend church while maintaining his own distance from anything resembling faith. "Trouble in town?" he asked without preamble, taking her horse's reins. "Nothing I couldn't handle," she replied, dismounting. "Though I suspect my presence here is causing more difficulties than you bargained for." "I don't give a damn what those biddies think," Ethan said roughly, then caught himself. "Pardon my language." Abigail almost smiled at his attempt at propriety. "Your concern is appreciated, but I'm not made of spun glass, Mr. Cole." He studied her for a long moment, and she could see the war playing out behind his gray eyes. Over the past weeks, she'd learned to read his moods the way his jaw tightened when he was worried, how his hands stilled when he was thinking hard about something. "Your week was up 2 weeks ago," he said finally. "Why do you stay?" It was the question she'd been asking herself. The debt had been more than repaid. Yet each Saturday, when she prepared to leave for town, she found reasons to return. "The garden needs tending," she said, which was true but not the whole truth. And Big Jim's been teaching me to make sourdough starter. It would be a shame to let it die." "That all?" She met his gaze directly. "No, but it's all I'm prepared to say right now." Something flickered in his eyes, disappointment relief before she could decipher it. Jake came running from the barn. "Boss, we got problems. The water in the eastern pasture's gone dry. Spring's completely tapped out." Ethan's expression hardened. "That's the third one this month. How many head are out there?" "About 200. We can move them, but we're running out of places with water." "Do what you can. I'll ride out to check the situation myself." As Jake hurried off, Abigail noticed the deepening lines around Ethan's eyes. The drought was taking its toll on everyone, but the responsibility sat heaviest on his shoulders. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" she asked. He shrugged. "This morning, I think." "That's what I thought. Come inside." Worrying on an empty stomach never solved anything. She busied herself in the kitchen, ladling out stew she'd kept warm and slicing fresh bread. Ethan sat at the small table, his large frame making the space feel even more intimate. "My father had a saying," she said, setting a plate before him. "The Lord sends trials to test us, but He also sends angels to help us through them." "I don't believe in angels," Ethan said automatically, then paused, "though I'm starting to wonder if I've been wrong about that." Their eyes met across the table, and the air seemed to thicken. Abigail felt her cheeks warm and turned quickly back to the stove. "Tell me about the water situation," she said, needing safer ground. Ethan explained between bites, painting a grim picture. Without significant rain soon, he'd have to sell off a large portion of the herd at a loss. And there was Blackstone, circling like a vulture, ready to buy up land and cattle at rock-bottom prices. "There has to be something we can do," Abigail mused. "What about drilling new wells?" "Takes money. I don't have liquid. Everything's tied up in the land and cattle." "The church has a small emergency fund." "No." His refusal was immediate and sharp. "I don't take charity." "It wouldn't be charity. It would be an investment. The church could partner with local ranchers, help drill community wells that everyone could use." Ethan stared at her. "You've been thinking about this." "I've had time to think while kneading bread." She admitted, "Your struggle isn't unique. Mr. Cole, every rancher in the valley is suffering, but you're all too proud to work together." "Pride's got nothing to do with it. It's—" He stopped, frowning. "It's what fear of being vulnerable, of owing someone something." She leaned forward earnestly. "What if working together is the only way any of you survive?" Before he could answer, the sound of approaching horses interrupted. Through the window, Abigail could see a familiar carriage approaching, followed by several riders. "Blackstone!" Ethan growled, rising. "Stay inside." "I will not," Abigail said firmly, following him onto the porch. Josiah Blackstone descended from his carriage with theatrical flair, flanked by hard-looking men Abigail didn't recognize. But it was the woman who emerged after him that made Ethan go rigid beside her. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things often are: perfectly coiffed golden hair, a dress that probably cost more than most cowboys made in a year, and eyes like winter ice. This had to be Margaret. "Hello, Ethan," Margaret Blackstone said, her voice like poisoned honey. "It's been too long." "Not long enough," Ethan replied curtly. "State your business and leave." Josiah smiled unpleasantly. Now? Is that any way to greet family after all? Margaret here still has such fond memories of her time with you." "That's enough. Josiah," Margaret said, but her eyes never left Ethan's face. "We're here on business. The drought has everyone reassessing their positions. We thought you might be ready to reconsider our offer." "The answer's still no. Even when your wells are running dry, even when your cattle are dying of thirst." Josiah pulled out a sheaf of papers. "I'm prepared to make a very generous offer, enough to set you up comfortably somewhere else. Maybe California, where the drought can't touch you. This is my land. I'm not selling. Margaret stepped forward. Placing a gloved hand on Ethan's arm, Abigail felt something hot and unfamiliar surge through her chest. Don't be stubborn, darling, Margaret purred. You always were too proud for your own good. It's what I loved about you. Don't, Ethan shook off her hand. You made your choice 8 years ago, and I've regretted it every day since, Margaret said softly, her eyes filling with practiced tears. Josiah isn't the man I thought he was. He's cruel, controlling. I made a terrible mistake. Ethan, Abigail watched the performance with growing disgust. Every word, every gesture was calculated for maximum effect. Mrs. Blackstone, she said coolly, I believe your husband is waiting for you. Margaret's gaze shifted to Abigail, and the tears vanished like morning dew. And you are? Abigail Reed, I work here. The preacher's daughter. Margaret's laugh was like breaking glass. How quaint. Ethan always did have a weakness for strays. That's enough. Ethan's voice was dangerous now. Get off my property, both of you. Think about our offer, Josiah said, unperturbed. My patience isn't infinite, neither are your options. As they prepared to leave, Margaret turned back one more time. I'll be in town for the next few days. Ethan, at the hotel, if you want to talk about anything, you know where to find me. The carriage rolled away, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in its wake. Ethan stood like a statue, his fists clenched at his sides. She's very beautiful, Abigail said quietly. She's a snake, Ethan replied harshly. Beautiful on the outside, poison within. Yet she still has power over you. He turned to look at her then, his gray eyes stormy. What makes you say that? Because you're still angry. Anger means the wound hasn't healed. And what would you know about it? The words came out sharper than he'd intended. You, with your faith and your innocence, and your belief that people are fundamentally good. Abigail lifted her chin. I know that holding on to bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I know that forgiveness isn't about them, it's about freeing yourself. Forgiveness, he laughed bitterly. She betrayed everything we'd built together for money and status. She made me believe in love, then showed me what a fool I was. How do you forgive that? By remembering that people who hurt others are usually broken themselves, Abigail said softly. By choosing to see her choice as her loss, not yours. By being grateful that her betrayal led you to become the man you are today. And what kind of man is that? She studied him for a long moment, this complicated, wounded soul who'd built walls so high he'd forgotten what lay beyond them. A man who risks his life for strangers, who treats his workers with respect and fairness, who's fighting to save not just his land but a way of life. She paused, then added quietly, a man worth 10 of Josiah Blackstone. Something shifted in Ethan's expression, the anger giving way to something more vulnerable. Abigail, I should start supper, she said quickly, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. The men will be hungry after moving the cattle. She fled to the kitchen, her heart pounding. Behind her, she heard Ethan's boots on the porch, pacing like a caged wolf. Dinner that evening was a subdued affair. The Cowboys had heard about the Blackstones' visit, and the mood was grim. Water was becoming scarcer by the day, and everyone knew that Josiah's offers would only get more aggressive as desperation grew. Maybe we should consider it, boss, one of the older hands said reluctantly. Better to sell while we can still get something for the land. We're not selling, Ethan said firmly. We'll find another way. What way? Another cowboy asked. Can't make it rain. Can't magic water from dry ground. Miss Abigail's got an idea about community wells. Big Jim offered. Told me about it while we were working the garden. Churches and ranchers working together. All eyes turned to Abigail, who felt heat rise in her cheeks. It was just a thought. Tell them, Ethan commanded. So she did, outlining her idea while the men listened intently. The more she spoke, the more the plan took shape, a cooperation between the church's emergency fund, the local ranchers' resources, and the expertise of men who knew the land. It could work, Jake said slowly. If we all pitched in together, hired a proper drilling crew. Blackstone would never agree to it, someone pointed out. Then we do it without him, Ethan said. The other ranchers, Henderson, Morrison, the widow Garrett, they're all suffering too. Maybe it's time we stopped trying to go it alone. It was a revelation. Hearing Ethan Cole advocate for cooperation, Abigail felt a surge of hope and something else. Something warm that spread through her chest when he caught her eye and nodded slightly. After dinner, she found herself alone with Ethan on the porch again. It was becoming a dangerous habit. These evening conversations under the stars. Your idea, he said without preamble. Will your father support it? I believe so. He's always preached that faith without works is dead. This would be faith in action. And the townspeople, they already gossip about you being here. This would give them more ammunition. Let them talk. Abigail said with more bravery than she felt. I'd rather be criticized for doing something than praised for doing nothing. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. You're not what I expected, Abigail Reed. What did you expect? Someone sheltered, naive, fragile. He turned to face her. Instead, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. I'm not strong, she protested. I'm terrified half the time. But you act anyway. That's what courage is. They stood there, the space between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Abigail knew she should go inside, knew that staying would only complicate an already complex situation. But something held her there, perhaps the same force that had brought her to the ranch in the first place. Ethan, she began, not sure what she wanted to say. Don't, he said roughly. Whatever you're going to say, don't. Not yet. I can't. I know, she said simply. And she did. The walls around his heart might be crumbling, but they hadn't fallen yet. Margaret's visit had shown her that. I should go inside, she said finally. Yes, he agreed, but neither of them moved. A coyote howled in the distance, breaking the spell. Abigail turned toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, she said softly, I think Margaret Blackstone is a fool. Any woman who could walk away from you for someone like Josiah. She never deserved you in the first place. She went inside before he could respond, but through the window, she saw him remain on the porch for a long time, staring out at the drought-stricken land as if it held answers to questions he was only beginning to ask. Change was coming to the Cole Ranch. She could feel it in the air like the promise of rain. Whether that change would bring salvation or destruction remained to be seen. But as Abigail prepared for bed, she found herself praying not just for rain, but for the courage to weather whatever storms lay ahead. The next morning brought a surprise. 3 neighboring ranchers arrived at the Cole Ranch before breakfast, their faces grave but determined. Heard you might have a plan about the water situation? Tom Morrison said, hat in hand. We're ready to listen. Abigail caught Ethan's eye across the yard and saw something she'd never seen before. Hope. It was fragile, uncertain, but unmistakably there. Perhaps, she thought, this is how walls finally come down. Not all at once, but stone by stone, until light can finally break through. The acrid smell of smoke invaded Ethan's dreams, pulling him from restless sleep into nightmare reality. He bolted upright, instantly alert, the orange glow visible through his bedroom window confirming his worst fears. Fire! The shout came from outside, followed by the clanging of the emergency bell. The hay barn's burning. Ethan pulled on his boots and raced outside, his heart sinking at the sight before him. The massive barn that held their winter feed supply was engulfed in flames. fire licking hungrily at the timber frame and sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. In this drought, with everything tinder dry, the fire could easily spread to the other buildings or worse, to the main house where Abigail slept. "Get every hand up," he shouted to Jake, who was already organizing the men. "Form bucket brigades from the well. We need to keep it from spreading." The cowboy stumbled from the bunkhouse, some still pulling on clothes, all immediately grasping the gravity of the situation. Without that hay, the cattle would starve come winter. But more pressing was the immediate danger sparks were already landing on the roof of the equipment shed. "The horses!" someone yelled. "They're still in the stable next door." Ethan ran toward the stable, the heat growing more intense with each step. The horses were screaming in terror, kicking at their stalls as smoke began to seep through the walls. He threw open the doors, dodging flying hooves as he worked to free the panicked animals. "Ethan..." He turned to see Abigail running toward him, still in her nightgown with only a shawl thrown over it, her hair streaming loose behind her. "Get back to the house," he ordered, even as he struggled with a particularly stubborn stall latch. "The Morrison boy," she gasped, ignoring his command. "Tommy's son, little Billy. He was playing in the hay barn earlier. His father can't find him." Ethan's blood ran cold. Tommy Morrison often brought his 6-year-old son to the ranch while his wife was ill, if the boy had fallen asleep in the hayloft. Without hesitation, Ethan plunged toward the burning barn. The heat hit him like a physical wall, and the smoke was already thick enough to choke on. He pulled his shirt up over his nose and mouth, squinting through the inferno. "Billy!" he shouted, though he could barely hear himself over the roar of the flames. "Billy Morrison." The main floor was already consumed, hay bales burning like giant torches. The ladder to the loft was still standing, though flames licked at its base. Ethan took it 3 rungs at a time, praying it would hold. The loft was an oven, smoke so thick he could barely see, then a small cough from the corner. "Billy!" The boy was huddled behind some old saddles, tears streaming down his soot-covered face. Ethan scooped him up, feeling the child's arms lock around his neck with desperate strength. "I've got you. Son, close your eyes and hold on tight." The ladder was fully aflame now. Ethan looked desperately for another way down, spotting the hay door used for loading. It was a 12-foot drop, but there was no choice. Clutching Billy tight, he ran for the opening and jumped. He hit the ground hard, rolling to protect the child, pain shooting through his shoulder. But Billy was safe, already being pulled from his arms by his sobbing father. "Ethan?" Abigail was suddenly there, her hands on his face, his shoulders, checking for injuries. "You fool! You brave, reckless fool!" He tried to stand and nearly collapsed, his left arm hanging useless. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the burns he'd barely noticed were making themselves known with vicious intensity. "The fire!" he gasped. "The other buildings." "The men have it controlled," she assured him, though tears were cutting tracks through the soot on her face. "Jake's got them wetting down the nearby roofs. Come on, we need to get you inside." She supported him to the house, surprisingly strong for her slight frame. In the kitchen, she lit lamps and began assessing the damage with clinical efficiency. "Your shirt needs to come off," she said, already reaching for her medical supplies. "Abigail, it's not proper." "Propriety can hang itself," she said firmly. "You have 2nd-degree burns that need immediate treatment." She helped him remove the remains of his shirt, her intake of breath telling him how bad it looked. Her touch was gentle as she cleaned the burns, applied salve, and began wrapping them in clean linen. "Your hands," he said, noticing for the first time that her own palms were red and blistered. "I helped with the buckets," she said dismissively. "They're nothing compared to Ethan. You could have died." "The boy would have died without you," her voice broke slightly. "When I saw you run into that inferno." She was standing between his knees as he sat at the kitchen table, close enough that he could see the fear still lingering in her eyes. Without thinking, he reached up with his good hand to touch her face. "I'm all right," he said softly. "No, you're not," she whispered. "You're burned and hurt and too stubborn to admit when you need help, just like with everything else in your life." They were close, so close he could feel her breath on his face, see the gold flecks in her green eyes. The moment stretched taut between them, full of possibilities and danger. A commotion outside broke the spell. Abigail stepped back, busying herself with the medical supplies while Ethan struggled to regain his composure. Jake burst through the door, his face grim beneath the soot. "Fire's out, boss, but the hay barn's a total loss." "How much feed did we lose?" "All of it, every last bale." Jake's expression darkened further. "And boss, this wasn't no accident. We found lamp oil splashed around the foundation. Someone set this deliberately." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Blackstone?" "Can't prove it," Jake said. "But who else would—" He stopped, noticing Ethan's bandages. "You all right?" "I'll live. Post extra guards. If Blackstone's escalating to arson, nothing's safe." After Jake left, Ethan found Abigail staring out the window at the smoldering ruins of the barn. Dawn was breaking, revealing the full extent of the devastation. "This is because of me," she said quietly. "My presence here, the community will project it's made you more of a threat to him." "Don't!" He stood, ignoring the pain, and moved to stand beside her. "Blackstone's been planning this long before you arrived. You're not to blame for his greed. Still, I should go. If my being here endangers—" "No!" The word came out harsher than intended. He tried again, gentler. "Abigail, you can't leave, not now." She turned to face him, and he saw his own feelings reflected in her eyes, the fear, the longing, the impossible situation they'd found themselves in. "Why?" she asked simply. He couldn't find the words. How could he explain that she'd become essential to the ranch, to the men, to him, that her presence had awakened something he'd thought dead forever instead? He fell back on practical matters. The well project. The men need you. The cookbook you're writing for their families. The garden that's somehow still alive despite the drought. You can't leave. Is that all? Her voice was barely a whisper. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he needed her like the desert needed rain, that her smile had become the light that got him through each day, but the walls around his heart, though cracked, still held. "Isn't it enough?" he asked roughly. Disappointment flickered across her face before she smoothed it away. "Of course, you're right. There's work to be done." The next few days passed in a blur of activity. Word of the fire spread quickly, bringing unexpected support from the community. Ranchers who'd agreed to the well project donated what hay they could spare. Even some townspeople who'd been critical of Abigail's position at the ranch sent supplies. "Christian charity." "Mrs." Chen said when she arrived with a wagon full of preserved vegetables from her garden. "Miss Abigail helped my family when no one else would. This is small repayment." The most surprising visitor was Reverend Reed himself, arriving with several men from the church. "Daughter," he said, embracing Abigail. "I heard about the fire. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine, Father, but Ethan Mr. Cole was injured saving the Morrison boy." The Reverend sought out Ethan, who was overseeing the cleanup despite Abigail's protests that he should be resting. "Mr. Cole," Reverend Reed extended his hand. "I owe you a debt of gratitude for protecting my daughter." "She doesn't need much protecting," Ethan said, shaking the offered hand carefully with his less injured right. "Your daughter's got more spine than most men I know." "Indeed." The Reverend agreed with a slight smile. Her mother was the same way. "Mr. Cole, I wonder if we might speak privately." They walked away from the others, stopping near the corrals. The Reverend was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. "Mr. Cole, I'm not blind to what's developing between you and my daughter." Ethan stiffened. "Reverend, I assure you—" Please, let me finish. The older man held up a hand. I know your reputation as an honorable man. I also know you've been hurt in the past. But I need to ask, what are your intentions toward Abigail? I don't know. Ethan admitted. I care for her. More than I should. But I can't offer her what she deserves. And what do you think she deserves? Better than a broken-down cowboy with more pride than sense. Someone who can give her a proper life. Not one of constant struggle against drought and men like Blackstone. Reverend Reed studied him thoughtfully. You know, Mr. Cole, sometimes we're so busy deciding what others deserve that we forget to ask what they want. My daughter is a grown woman who knows her own mind. Perhaps you should trust her to make her own choices. Before Ethan could respond, shouts arose from the direction of the house. They ran back to find a crowd gathered around someone on the ground. It's Tommy Morrison, Jake called out. He just collapsed. Says his chest hurts something fierce. Abigail was already kneeling beside the man, checking his pulse. He's having a heart episode. Get him inside. Carefully. Someone ride for Dr. Morrison fast. They carried Tommy into the house, his young son Billy clinging to his mother, who'd just arrived. Abigail worked with calm efficiency, loosening the man's clothing and elevating his feet. Tommy, you need to stay calm, she said soothingly. Breathe slowly. That's it. Ethan watched her work, amazed at her composure. She kept Tommy stable until the doctor arrived, then assisted without getting in the way. It was nearly an hour before the doctor emerged from the room. He'll live, Dr. Morrison announced. Thanks to Miss Reed's quick action. If she hadn't recognized the symptoms and responded correctly... Tommy's wife burst into tears of relief, hugging Abigail fiercely. You saved him, just like Mr. Cole saved our Billy. How can we ever repay you? As the Morrisons were settled into the guest room to allow Tommy to recover before traveling, Ethan found himself alone with Abigail on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds that reminded him uncomfortably of fire. You were amazing today, he said quietly. I did what needed doing, she replied, just as you did when you ran into that burning barn. Abigail. He turned to face her, his resolve crumbling. Your father asked about my intentions. Her breath caught. What did you tell him? The truth. That I don't know, that you deserve better. There you go again, she said with a flash of spirit. Deciding what I deserve without consulting me. Then what do you want? The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. She was quiet for a long moment, then stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest gently on his bandaged chest. I want a man who puts others before himself, who fights for what's right even when it costs him everything, who's building something meaningful in this harsh land. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I want you, Ethan Cole, exactly as you are. He covered her hand with his, feeling the rapid beat of her heart through their joined palms. I'm scared, he admitted. The last time I let someone in. I'm not Margaret, she said firmly. I'm not looking for wealth or status. I've seen what those things are worth in Boston society. What we're building here, community. Purpose. Love, that's real wealth. Love. The word came out strangled. She smiled, though tears trembled on her lashes. Yes, Ethan, love. Because that's what this is. Isn't it what's been growing between us despite all our efforts to deny it? He pulled her closer with his good arm, resting his forehead against hers. Abigail Reed, you've broken every rule I set for myself. Good, she whispered. They were foolish rules anyway. He might have kissed her then, might have finally let the last of his walls crumble, but the sound of approaching horses interrupted. They sprang apart as riders appeared, Sheriff Watson and several deputies. Dim, Mr. Cole, the sheriff called out. We've got news about your fire. Found evidence at the Blackstone Place lamp oil matching what was used, and one of his men talking when he's drunk. You want to press charges? Ethan felt Abigail's hand slip into his, offering silent support. Here was a chance for justice, but also for escalating a conflict that could consume them all. "What do you think?" he asked Abigail quietly. She squeezed his hand. "I think sometimes showing mercy speaks louder than seeking revenge, but this is your decision." He thought of Tommy Morrison, alive because of Abigail's skill, of Billy, safe because someone had thought his life worth risking everything for, of the community that had rallied around them in crisis. "No charges," he said finally. "But Sheriff, make sure Blackstone knows we have evidence. If anything else happens to my ranch, my people, or any of the other ranchers will use it." The sheriff nodded. "Understood. For what it's worth. Mr. Cole, I think you're making the wise choice. Blackstone's already facing scrutiny over some questionable business practices. Give him enough rope." After the sheriff left, Ethan and Abigail stood together in the gathering darkness. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, but underneath it was the promise of rain, distant but unmistakable. "You think I made the right choice?" he asked. "I think you made the choice that lets you sleep at night," she replied. "That's always the right choice." A cool breeze stirred, and Abigail shivered, without thinking. Ethan wrapped his good arm around her, drawing her against his side. She fit perfectly, as if she'd been made for this spot. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," he pressed a kiss to the top of her head, surprising them both. "Now we rebuild. The barn, the community, everything. Together." "Together," she agreed. And in that word was a promise of all the tomorrows to come. In the distance, thunder rumbled, still far off, but growing closer. The drought would break eventually, and when it did, Ethan realized he wanted Abigail beside him to see the desert bloom. The richest cowboy had indeed sworn off love, but the preacher's daughter, with her quiet strength and boundless heart, had shown him that some vows were made to be broken and that sometimes the greatest wealth came not from what you built alone, but from what you were brave enough to share. The Cedar Ridge courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Every bench was filled, and people lined the walls, fans fluttering in the stifling August heat at the plaintiff's table. Josiah Blackstone sat with his team of lawyers from Denver, their dark suits and leather briefcases a stark contrast to the simple clothing of the local ranchers. Ethan adjusted his string tie, the only concession to formality over his usual ranch wear. Beside him, Samuel Hartley, the only lawyer in town willing to take his case, shuffled through papers with nervous energy. "Remember," Hartley whispered, "Blackstone's claiming you defaulted on loans you never took. He's got forged documents, but proving they're fake won't be easy." From the gallery, Ethan could feel Abigail's steady gaze. She sat with her father in the third row, her presence both a comfort and a distraction. The past weeks since the fire had seen their relationship deepen, though they'd been careful to maintain propriety. Still, the whole town knew which way the wind was blowing. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Theodore Whitman." The bailiff called out. Judge Whitman, a silver-haired man with piercing eyes, took his seat. He was known for being fair but tough, and Ethan could only hope that reputation would hold true today. "We're here in the matter of Blackstone versus Cole," the judge began. "Mr. Blackstone claims that Mr. Cole owes him the sum of $15,000, plus interest, secured against the Cole Ranch. Mr. Cole denies these debts exist. Mr. Blackstone, you may present your case." Blackstone's lead lawyer, a sharp-featured man named Cornelius Ashford, stood with practiced confidence. "Your Honor, we will show through documentary evidence that Mr. Cole accepted multiple loans from my client over the past 3 years, loans he has failed to repay despite repeated requests." Ashford produced a stack of papers, each supposedly bearing Ethan's signature. As they were passed around, Ethan felt his jaw tighten. The forgeries were good, very good. Someone had studied his handwriting carefully. "These are lies," Ethan muttered to Hartley. I know. His lawyer replied. But knowing and proving are different things. The morning dragged on as Blackstone's team presented their case. Witness after witness testified to seeing Ethan in Blackstone's office, though Ethan knew he'd never set foot in the place. It was clear Blackstone had paid well for this testimony. During a recess, Ethan stepped outside for air, finding Jake and several of his cowboys gathered on the courthouse steps. "How's it looking, boss?" Big Jim asked anxiously. "Like Blackstone's bought himself a mighty convincing lie." Ethan replied grimly. "This ain't right," Tommy Morrison said. He'd recovered from his heart episode but still looked pale. "Everyone knows you'd never borrow from that snake." "Knowing and proving." Ethan repeated Hartley's words. "Ethan." Abigail appeared at his elbow, her face composed but her eyes worried. "There has to be something we can do, some way to prove." "Miss Reed." The voice cut through their conversation like a blade. Margaret Blackstone descended the courthouse steps, resplendent in a blue silk dress that probably cost more than most families saw in a year. "I wonder if I might have a word with Mr. Cole, privately." Abigail's chin lifted. "I don't think—" "It's all right," Ethan interrupted, curious despite himself. "What do you want, Margaret?" Margaret glanced meaningfully at the others until they reluctantly dispersed, though Abigail moved only as far as the courthouse door, her posture rigid with disapproval. "You're going to lose," Margaret said without preamble. "Josiah's been planning this for months. Every detail, every forged document, every bought witness. He means to have your ranch. Ethan." "Then why are you telling me this?" She looked away, a crack appearing in her perfectly composed facade. "Because I owe you that much? Because what I did to you? What I've become?" She stopped, gathering herself. "I can help you." "At what price?" "No price. Call it atonement." She reached into her reticule and withdrew an envelope. "Josiah keeps his real records in a safe at the house. These are copies of his actual ledgers, showing he never lent you a cent. They also show where the money for the forged documents came from." Ethan took the envelope, feeling the weight of it. "Why now, Margaret? After all these years?" "Because I'm tired of being married to a monster," she said quietly. "Because watching him try to destroy you the same way he destroyed my father's business. I can't be party to it anymore. To your father," she laughed bitterly. "You didn't know Josiah courted me to get to my father's banking connections. Once he had what he wanted, he ruined Papa completely. He died of a heart attack 2 years ago, broken and penniless." Her perfectly painted lips trembled. "I chose wealth over love, Ethan, and I've paid for it every day since." "Margaret, don't pity me," she said sharply. "I made my choices, but you still have a chance for happiness. Don't let Josiah take that from you." Her eyes flicked toward the courthouse door where Abigail waited. "She's good for you, better than I ever was." Before he could respond, she swept back up the steps, leaving him holding evidence that could save everything. When court reconvened, Hartley's entire demeanor had changed. Armed with Margaret's documents, he went on the offensive. "Your Honor," he said, "new evidence has come to light that we request permission to present." Ashford objected strenuously, but Judge Whitman, after reviewing the documents, allowed them to be admitted. "These appear to be Mr. Blackstone's actual business ledgers," Hartley explained, his confidence growing. "As you can see, there's no record of any loans to Mr. Cole. There are, however, substantial payments to a Mr. Silas Crane, a known forger operating out of Denver." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Blackstone's face went from red to white as he realized what had happened. "Furthermore," Hartley continued, raising his voice over the noise, "we call Mrs. Margaret Blackstone to the stand." The whispers turned to gasps. Margaret rose from her seat in the gallery, her head high despite the shock on her husband's face. As she was sworn in, Ethan caught Abigail's eye, She nodded slightly, understanding and approval in her gaze. Mrs. Blackstone, Hartley began. Are these documents from your husband's private safe? They are, Margaret replied clearly. And do they represent a true accounting of his business dealings? To my knowledge, yes. Your Honor, Ashford interrupted desperately. Spousal privilege prevents... Mrs. Blackstone has volunteered to testify. Judge Whitman cut him off. Continue, Mr. Hartley. Margaret's testimony was devastating. She detailed not only the plot against Ethan, but several other schemes Josiah had perpetrated over the years. By the time she finished, Blackstone looked like a trapped animal. You lying witch, he snarled, half rising from his chair before Ashford pulled him down. Mr. Blackstone, Judge Whitman's voice was ice cold. You will control yourself in my courtroom or be held in contempt. The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. Not only were all claims against Ethan dismissed, but the evidence was to be turned over to the federal marshal for investigation of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. As the courtroom cleared, Blackstone managed to get close to Ethan, his face twisted with rage. This isn't over, Cole, he hissed. You think you've won, I'll see you ruined if it's the last thing I do. Mr. Blackstone. Sheriff Watson appeared at his elbow. I think you'd better come with me. The marshal's going to want to ask you some questions. As Blackstone was led away, still spewing threats, Ethan found himself face to face with Margaret one last time. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank me, she replied. Just be happy. Be everything Josiah and I couldn't be. She glanced at where Abigail stood with her father. She'll make you better than you ever thought you could be. Let her. Then she was gone, walking out of the courthouse and, Ethan suspected, out of Cedar Ridge forever. Ethan. Abigail's composure finally cracked as she flew into his arms, propriety forgotten in the moment of victory. You did it. We did it, he corrected, holding her tight, not caring who saw. All of us. The celebration that evening at the Cole Ranch was unlike anything the place had seen. Ranchers, townspeople, and cowboys mingled freely, sharing food and drink and the sweet taste of justice served. The Community Well Project, which had been in jeopardy if Ethan lost his ranch, could now move forward. Never thought I'd see the day Blackstone got his comeuppance, Tom Morrison said, raising a glass. Here's to honest men and the women brave enough to stand by them. The toast was echoed enthusiastically, though Ethan noticed Abigail blush prettily at the implication. As the party continued, he found a moment to pull her aside, leading her to the relative quiet of the garden she'd coaxed from the desert soil. Abigail, he began, then stopped, unsure how to say what was in his heart. I know, she said softly, reading him as she always did. It's been quite a day. More than that. He took her hands in his, marveling at how small yet strong they were. When I thought I might lose everything, the ranch wasn't what I was most afraid of losing. Her breath caught. Ethan? I've been a fool, he continued, the words coming easier now. I built walls to keep from being hurt again, but all they did was keep out the very thing I needed most. And what was that? You, he said simply. Your faith, your courage, your stubborn refusal to let me wallow in my own bitterness. You saved me, Abigail, long before today. Tears were sliding down her cheeks now, but she was smiling. You saved yourself. Ethan Cole, I just reminded you that you were worth saving. He pulled her closer, one hand coming up to cup her face. I love you, Abigail Reed. I probably have since the day you pressed that handkerchief into my hand and turned my world upside down. I love you too, she whispered. So much it frightens me sometimes. Then we'll be frightened together, he said, and kissed her. It was a kiss worth waiting for, full of promise and passion and the sweet relief of walls finally fallen. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Abigail's eyes were shining. "What happens now?" she asked, echoing her question from the night of the fire. "Now," Ethan grinned, feeling lighter than he had in 8 years. "Now I court you properly. Your father already gave his blessing, contingent on my intentions being honorable." "And are they honorable?" "Completely," he assured her. "Though I should warn you, I'm not a patient man. Don't expect a long courtship." She laughed, the sound like music in the desert air. "I wouldn't dream of it. We've wasted enough time already." They returned to the party hand in hand, their faces telling the story more clearly than any announcement. The cheer that went up could probably be heard in town. "About time," Jake called out, grinning broadly. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the barn until you figured it out." As the evening wore on, Ethan found himself watching Abigail move through the crowd, bringing people together with her warmth and grace. This woman who'd started as a debt to be repaid had become the very heart of the ranch, pumping life into what had been merely existence. Reverend Reed approached him as the party began to wind down. "Mr. Cole, I believe congratulations are in order." "Thank you, Reverend, and thank you for trusting me with her." "I didn't," the older man said with surprising honesty. "I trusted her. Abigail has always known her own mind. I just pray you'll make her as happy as she deserves." "I'll spend my life trying," Ethan promised. "That's all any of us can do." The Reverend said, "Love isn't about being perfect, Mr. Cole. It's about choosing each other again and again, especially when times are hard." As the last guests departed and quiet settled over the ranch, Ethan found Abigail on the porch, gazing up at the stars. "No regrets?" he asked, joining her. "None," she said firmly. "Today I watched a good man receive justice and a hard man learn that love is stronger than hate. I'd say it was a very good day indeed." "And tomorrow? Tomorrow we start building our future," she said. "The wells, the ranch, our life together. It won't be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," Ethan agreed. "But with you beside me, I'm not afraid of the work." Thunder rumbled in the distance again, closer than before. The rains were coming, he could feel it in his bones. And when they arrived, washing the drought away, he and Abigail would be ready to help the land bloom again. "I should go in," Abigail said reluctantly. "Dawn comes early." "One more minute," Ethan requested, pulling her back against his chest. "I've waited 8 years to hold you like this. Let me savor it." They stood together in comfortable silence. Two souls who'd found their way through fire and drought to this moment of peace. The richest cowboy had sworn off love, built an empire on that vow. Yet here he stood, all his wealth nothing compared to the treasure in his arms. "Ethan," Abigail said softly. "Yes, love." "Thank you for letting me break your rules." He pressed a kiss to her temple, breathing in the scent of lavender and home. "Thank you for being stubborn enough to break them." As if in answer to their joy, the first drops of rain began to fall, tentative at first, then stronger, carrying the promise of renewal. They stayed on the porch, watching the thirsty earth drink deeply, knowing that this was only the beginning. The drought was breaking, and with it, a new chapter was beginning for the Cole Ranch and all who called it home. The dust cloud on the horizon meant trouble. Ethan lowered his field glasses, jaw tightening as he counted the riders, at least a dozen, moving fast toward the ranch. After Blackstone's arrest 2 weeks ago, everyone had been on edge, waiting for his remaining supporters to make their move. "Jake," he called to his foreman, "get the men ready. We've got company coming, and they don't look friendly." Word spread quickly through the ranch. Cowboys checked their weapons and took defensive positions while the women and children were moved to the main house. Abigail appeared at Ethan's side, her father's old rifle in her hands. "I told you to stay inside," Ethan said, though he wasn't surprised by her defiance. "And I told you I'm not the type to hide while others fight," she replied calmly. "Besides, I'm a fair shot." Papa made sure of that." Before he could argue, the riders crested the last hill. At their head rode Duke Ritter, Blackstone's former foreman, his face set in grim determination. They pulled up just outside rifle range, dust swirling around them like smoke. "Cole," Ritter shouted, "we're here to settle accounts. Blackstone paid us good money to take you down, and we aim to collect." "Blackstone's finished. Ritter," Ethan called back. "There's no money coming. Go home while you still can." "Can't do that," Ritter replied. "See, without Blackstone's pay, we got nothing. But your ranch, split between us boys, would set us up real nice." "You're talking about theft and murder in front of witnesses," Sheriff Watson said, stepping out from behind the water trough. He'd arrived that morning to discuss security concerns. "Fortuitous timing. I'd think real careful about your next move." Ritter laughed harshly. "One sheriff against 12 men, I'll take those odds." The tension stretched taut as both sides waited for someone to make the first move. Then, unexpectedly, the sound of singing drifted across the yard. That same hymn, that same enthusiastic voice, Ezekiel Hornsby appeared from behind the barn, leading his pack mule, seemingly oblivious to the standoff. "Morning, folks," the old prospector called out cheerfully. "Say, Mr. Ritter, might you be the same Duke Ritter who worked the Garrett spread 5 years back?" Ritter frowned, thrown off by the interruption. "Yeah, what of it?" "Just wondering if you ever told these boys about what happened there." Ezekiel continued conversationally. About the fire that killed the Garrett children. Terrible tragedy. The color drained from Ritter's face. Some of his men exchanged uneasy glances. "That was an accident," Ritter said quickly. "Lamp got knocked over." "Funny thing about that," Ezekiel mused. "I was passing through when it happened. Saw you riding away from that burning house, saddlebags full. Always wondered what was so important you couldn't stop to help those young'uns." "You're lying, old man." "Am I?" Ezekiel reached into his pack and pulled out a worn notebook. "I write everything down. You see, dates, places, faces. Been meaning to share this with the authorities, but never found the right moment. Until now." Several of Ritter's men were backing their horses away now, clearly wanting no part of child murder. "This changes nothing." Ritter snarled, but his support was evaporating. "Actually, it changes everything," a new voice said. Margaret Blackstone emerged from the main house where she'd been helping with the children. She looked different, plainer clothes. Hair simply styled, but there was a strength in her bearing that hadn't been there before. "Did my husband promise you payment for this violence, Mr. Ritter? Because I control his assets now, and I can assure you, not 1 cent will go toward bloodshed." "You got no authority." "I have power of attorney while my husband awaits trial," Margaret interrupted. "And my first act was to review his arrangements. Any man who rides away now will receive the wages honestly owed him. Continue with this foolishness, and you'll get nothing but a cell next to Josiah's." The defections began immediately. First 1, then 3, then most of the group wheeled their horses around. Soon only Ritter and 2 others remained. "Cowards," Ritter shouted after them. "Yellow-bellied cowards." "No," Ethan said, stepping forward. "They're smart men who know when to fold a losing hand. You're outnumbered now. Ritter, ride away." Not without satisfaction. Ritter growled, hand moving toward his pistol. "You cost me everything. Cole, my job, my reputation. Your own greed cost you those things." Ethan replied, "Same as it cost Blackstone, but you can still choose different. Ride away, start fresh somewhere else. Or stay and face justice for the Garrett children," Sheriff Watson added, his own hand near his weapon. For a moment, it seemed Ritter might actually draw. Then Abigail stepped forward, moving past Ethan before he could stop her. Mr. Ritter," she said calmly, "you have a choice to make. You can die here today, achieving nothing but more sorrow, or you can live, and perhaps find redemption. Those children can't be brought back, but you could spend your remaining years trying to balance the scales. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. My patience, unlike my faith, has limits. Something in her steady gaze, her unflinching courage, seemed to reach through Ritter's rage. His hand trembled, then fell away from his gun. "This ain't over," he muttered, but the fight had gone out of him. "Yes, it is," Ethan said firmly. "Take your men and go. If I see you on my land again, we won't be talking." Ritter wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his two companions following. As the dust settled, a collective breath was released. "Well," Ezekiel said brightly. "That was exciting. Mind if I water my mule?" "Help yourself," Ethan said, still watching the horizon. "And Ezekiel, thank you. Again." The old man winked. "Just happened to be passing through. Again." As the crowd dispersed, Ethan caught Abigail's arm. "That was foolish, stepping out like that." "Perhaps," she agreed. "But I couldn't stand by and watch men die when words might save them. Even men like Ritter deserve a chance at redemption. He might have shot you, but he didn't." She touched his face gently. "Have a little faith, Ethan. It's served us well so far." Before he could respond, Sheriff Watson approached. "That was close. Too close. Ritter might be gone, but there'll be others. Desperate men do desperate things." "What do you suggest?" Ethan asked. "It might be time to think bigger than just defending the ranch." The sheriff said, "This valley needs law and order. Real stability. I'm getting too old to cover all this territory alone. How'd you feel about a deputy's badge? Cole?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "I'm a rancher, not a lawman." "You're a man who stands for justice," Watson countered. "Folks respect you, especially after the trial. Pin on a badge. Help me keep the peace part-time. Might discourage the next batch of troublemakers." I'll think about it." After the sheriff left, Margaret approached. She'd been staying at the ranch since the trial, helping where she could, trying to make amends. "I should go," she said quietly. "My presence here only complicates things." "Where will you go?" Abigail asked with genuine concern. "San Francisco. I have a cousin there who runs a school for disadvantaged children. I thought perhaps I could help. Try to do some good for once." "That sounds wonderful," Abigail said warmly. "You'll do well there." Margaret's eyes misted. "You're kinder than I deserve, Miss Reed. Take care of him." She glanced at Ethan. "He's a good man, better than he knows." As Margaret's carriage rolled away, Ethan felt a chapter of his life closing. The past no longer had power over him. Only the future mattered now. That evening, the ranch hands gathered for supper in unusually high spirits. The confrontation with Ritter had unified them even more, and stories were already growing in the telling. "Did you see Miss Abigail face down those outlaws?" Tommy Morrison exclaimed. "Cool as spring water. She was like something out of them dime novels." Big Jim agreed. "The preacher's daughter in the Cowboy has a ring to it." Abigail blushed prettily while Ethan felt his chest swell with pride. This woman who'd walked into his life with nothing but determination and faith had become the heart of their community. After supper, Reverend Reed arrived for his weekly visit. He found Ethan and Abigail in the garden, planning the expansion made possible by the recent rains. "I heard about today's excitement," the Reverend said. "I'm glad no one was hurt." "Your daughter has a gift for diffusing situations," Ethan said, "though she takes too many risks." "She gets that from her mother," Reverend Reed replied with a fond smile. "Speaking of which, have you two set a date? The whole town's buzzing with speculation." Ethan and Abigail exchanged glances. They'd been so focused on the ranch and the threats against it that wedding plans had taken a back seat. "Soon, Father," Abigail promised. "Once things settle down." Things never truly settle in this life, her father observed. Sometimes you have to claim your happiness in the midst of chaos. That night, as Ethan walked Abigail to her horse for her ride back to town, she still insisted on maintaining some proprieties. He found himself thinking about the Reverend's words. "Abigail," he said suddenly, "marry me." She laughed. "I thought we'd already established that." Eventually. "No, I mean now. This week. Why wait for perfect timing that might never come?" She studied his face in the moonlight. "Are you sure there's still so much uncertainty?" "The only thing I'm certain of is you." He interrupted. "Everything else, the ranch, the threats, the future, we'll face it together. But I want to face it as your husband." "Ethan Cole," she said softly, "are you actually proposing to me in a garden at night with no ring and dust in your hair?" He grinned. "I suppose I am, though I do have this." He pulled out the handkerchief she'd given him that first day, now carefully cleaned and pressed. "You gave this to me when we were strangers. Will you take it back as my promise to be your husband?" Tears slipped down her cheeks as she took the delicate fabric. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her then, pouring all his love and promise into the embrace. When they parted, both were breathless. "Sunday," she said decisively. "This Sunday, after services. I don't need anything fancy, just our friends and family." "Sunday," he agreed, "though that only gives us 5 days to prepare." "Then we'd better get started," she said with a smile that lit up the night. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of preparations. The ranch women threw themselves into planning with enthusiasm, while the cowboys worked to spruce up the ranch for guests. Even crusty Jake was caught whistling while he worked. On Saturday evening, as final preparations were being made, Ethan found himself standing in the cemetery beside his family's graves. He'd brought wildflowers that had bloomed after the rain. "Ma, Pa, Sarah," he said quietly, "I'm getting married tomorrow. You'd love her. She's strong and kind and sees the best in everyone. She makes me want to be the man you always believed I could be." A gentle breeze stirred the grass, and for a moment, Ethan could almost feel their presence, their approval. "I'm not alone anymore," he continued. "And I promise, I'll take care of her the way you took care of each other, with love, respect, and faith." "They know," a voice said softly. Abigail approached, carrying her own bouquet. "I came to introduce myself properly." Together, they stood before the graves, hands clasped, past and future joining in a moment of perfect peace. "Mr. and Mrs. Cole," Abigail said to the headstones. "I promise to love your son with all my heart, to stand by him in good times and bad, to help him build a legacy you'd be proud of." Ethan squeezed her hand, too moved to speak. This woman understood him in ways he was still discovering. As they walked back to the ranch, the sunset painting the sky in brilliant colors, Ethan felt a completeness he hadn't experienced in 18 years. Tomorrow, before God and their community, he would pledge himself to Abigail Reed. The richest cowboy who'd sworn off love was about to become something far wealthier, a husband, a partner, a man with hope for the future. "No regrets?" Abigail asked, echoing his question from the night of the trial. "Only one," he said. Her brow furrowed. "What?" "That I waited so long to let you break all my rules." She laughed, the sound carrying across the prairie like a promise of joy to come. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, walking hand in hand toward their future, Ethan Cole knew he was exactly where he belonged. The stars began to appear overhead, witnesses to a love that had overcome pride, fear, and tragedy. And somewhere in the distance, as if in blessing, thunder rumbled, not the threat of storm this time, but the promise of continued abundance. The drought had broken, and with tomorrow's wedding, so would the last chains binding Ethan's heart. The preacher's daughter had done more than break his rules. She'd shown him that sometimes the greatest strength comes from allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and the greatest wealth comes from opening your heart to love. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of pristine blue sky that only came after cleansing rains. The Cole Ranch had been transformed overnight. White ribbons fluttered from fence posts. Wildflowers adorned every surface, and beneath the ancient cottonwood tree that had weathered countless storms, an arch of woven branches waited for the ceremony. Ethan adjusted his new suit for the 10th time, his hands uncharacteristically nervous. Jake, serving as his best man, chuckled at his discomfort. "I never thought I'd see the day Ethan Cole got nervous." Jake teased, "You've faced down outlaws and drought without breaking a sweat." "This is different," Ethan replied, tugging at his string tie. "This matters more than anything I've ever done." In town, at the parsonage, Abigail stood before her mother's mirror while Mrs. Chen and Mrs. Morrison helped with final touches to her dress. It was simple but elegant cream-colored silk that had been her mother's, altered to fit perfectly. "You look radiant, dear," Mrs. Chen said, adjusting the veil. "Your mother would be so proud." Reverend Reed knocked gently on the door. "It's time, daughter." Abigail turned to face her father, and his eyes misted at the sight. "You look just like her," he said softly. "Beautiful, strong, ready to take on the world." "I'm ready, Papa," she said, taking his arm. "More ready than I've ever been for anything." The ride to the ranch was filled with excited chatter from the townspeople who'd come to celebrate. It seemed all of Cedar Ridge had turned out ranchers, merchants, even some who'd initially disapproved of Abigail's unconventional choice to work at the ranch. As they arrived, Abigail gasped at the transformation. "It's perfect," she breathed, taking in the decorations, the gathering crowd, and most of all, Ethan waiting beneath the cottonwood tree. The ceremony began with the whole congregation singing Amazing Grace, voices joining in harmony across the prairie. Then, as her father walked her down the makeshift aisle between rows of beaming faces, Abigail's eyes found Ethan's and stayed there. He looked magnificent in his dark suit, but it was the expression on his face that made her heart soar, wonder, love, and joy, unguarded for perhaps the first time since she'd known him. "Dearly beloved." Reverend Reed began when they reached the altar, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "We gather today to witness something precious, two souls choosing to become one, not in times of ease, but in the midst of challenge, proving that love is not a fair-weather friend, but a companion for all seasons." As they exchanged vows, Ethan's voice was strong and sure. "Abigail, you came into my life when I'd given up on love, on faith, on anything beyond mere survival. You showed me that the walls I'd built to protect myself were actually keeping me from truly living. I promise to love you, to stand beside you, to trust in the future we'll build together, come drought or plenty, joy or sorrow." Abigail's eyes shimmered with tears as she replied, "Ethan, you say I saved you, but the truth is we saved each other. You showed me that strength can coexist with gentleness, that a wounded heart can heal and love even deeper than before. I promise to be your partner, your comfort, your challenge when you need it, and your peace when the world grows harsh." When Reverend Reed pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Ethan kissed his bride with a tenderness that had rough cowboys wiping their eyes, though they deny it later. The celebration that followed was unlike anything the ranch had ever seen. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by the entire community. Musicians had come from town, and soon couples were dancing on a floor of packed earth beneath strings of lanterns. "Never seen the boss look so happy," Big Jim commented to Tommy Morrison as they watched Ethan spin Abigail in a waltz. "Love'll do that to a man." Tommy replied, his own wife tucked against his side. "Makes everything else seem worthwhile." As the afternoon wore on, Sheriff Watson approached the newlyweds with a small package. "Wedding gift," he said gruffly. "Figured you might need this." Ethan opened it to find a deputy's badge gleaming in the sunlight. "Sheriff, Before you say no, hear me out, Watson interrupted. This valley's changing. The drought's broken. But that'll bring new folks, new challenges. We need good men wearing badges, men who understand that law and justice aren't always the same thing. Part-time, like I said. Think about it. As the sheriff walked away, Abigail touched the badge thoughtfully. It suits you, she said. Protecting people, standing for what's right, it's who you are. We'll see, Ethan said, pocketing the badge. Right now, all I want to think about is dancing with my wife. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, an unexpected guest arrived. Ezekiel Hornsby, still leading his faithful mule, appeared at the edge of the celebration. Hope I'm not too late to wish the happy couple well, he called out cheerfully. Ezekiel Abigail hurried to greet him. You're just in time for cake. The old prospector produced a wrapped gift from his pack. Something for your new home, he said with a mysterious smile. Inside was a beautifully carved wooden cross, similar to the one he'd sent Abigail before, but larger, meant to hang on a wall. It's from the same wood as that old cottonwood, Ezekiel explained, nodding toward the ceremony tree. Figured something that's weathered so many storms might bring you good fortune in weathering your own. It's perfect, Abigail said, hugging the old man. Will you stay for the celebration? Oh, I think I'll mosey on, Ezekiel replied. Places to go, people to help, but I suspect we'll meet again. He winked at Ethan. Take care of each other. The best adventures are just beginning. As mysteriously as he'd arrived, the prospector departed, his hymns floating back on the evening breeze. The party continued late into the night, but eventually, the guests began to depart, offering final congratulations and good wishes. Jake organized the Cowboys to handle cleanup, insisting the newlyweds retire to the house their house now. Standing on the porch, watching lanterns bob away into the darkness as guests headed home, Ethan pulled Abigail close. Happy? He asked. Beyond words, she replied. Though I do have one question. What's that? What happened to the man who swore off love, the one who built walls so high no one could climb them? Ethan smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. He met a preacher's daughter who didn't climb the wall she showed him. They were never as strong as he thought, that all it took was faith, patience, and a very stubborn woman to bring them down. Stubborn? She protested with mock indignation. I prefer determined. Call it what you like, he said, scooping her up in his arms and carrying her over the threshold. You broke every rule I set for myself, Mrs. Cole, and I'll spend the rest of my life thanking God for it. Inside, the house that had felt empty for so long was now filled with warmth and possibility. The wooden cross from Ezekiel found its place on the wall, a symbol of faith restored and love renewed. As spring progressed, the Cole Ranch flourished like never before. The Community Wells Project moved forward, bringing prosperity to the entire valley. Ethan accepted the deputy's position, finding that protecting his community came as naturally as running his ranch. Abigail's garden expanded, becoming a gathering place for the ranch women and their children. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in brilliant hues, Abigail placed Ethan's hand on her still flat stomach. The ranch is about to get a bit more crowded, she said softly. Ethan's eyes widened, joy and wonder crossing his face. A baby? By Christmas, if my calculations are correct. She smiled at his expression. Are you happy? Happy. He pulled her into his arms, his voice thick with emotion. Abigail, you've given me everything, love, purpose, hope, and now a family. I didn't know a man could hold this much happiness. As if in agreement, thunder rumbled gently in the distance, not a threat but a promise of continued abundance. The drought that had nearly destroyed everything had given way to a season of plenty, both in the land and in their hearts. I love you, Ethan Cole, Abigail whispered against his chest. Thank you for letting me break all your rules. I love you too, Abigail Cole. He replied, "Thank you for showing me they were meant to be broken." Under the vast Wyoming sky, with stars beginning to twinkle overhead, they held each other close. The richest cowboy had indeed sworn off love, building an empire on that broken promise. But the preacher's daughter, with her unwavering faith and gentle strength, had shown him that true wealth couldn't be measured in acres or cattle. True wealth was in the love they shared, the community they'd built, the child they'd created, and the future they'd face together. It was in choosing hope over fear, faith over cynicism, and love over the safety of solitude. As night settled over the Cole Ranch, now truly a home rather than just a house, Ethan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that dusty road where he'd first seen Abigail facing down bandits to this moment of perfect contentment. Every step had led to this. The preacher's daughter had broken his every rule, and in doing so, she'd given him a life worth living, a love worth fighting for, and a future bright with promise. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and somewhere in the darkness, another answered. Even the wild creatures knew what Ethan had learned, that some things were worth the risk, worth the vulnerability, worth breaking every promise you'd made to keep your heart safe. Because sometimes, the very thing you've sworn to avoid is exactly what you need to become whole. The stars wheeled overhead. The prairie wind whispered through the grass, and in the house beneath the cottonwood tree, two hearts beat as one. Proof that love could flourish even in the harshest ground if you had faith enough to let it grow. Thank you all for listening to this wonderful story. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Ethan and Abigail's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories of love, courage, and adventure on the frontier. Please hit that like button and show your support by clicking the hype button so more people can discover and enjoy these heartwarming stories. Until next time, partners.